Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Quintain Consulting and Create Streets webinar on de-risking development in brownfield sites. It's 12:30. We'll start a minute or so late just to make sure that everyone can everyone enter. But we will be starting in the next 30 seconds or so. You're all just coming into the waiting room and then into the call now. Good afternoon from Sherborne, of all places where I'm talking to you, and my colleagues David Godfrey, Duncan Bernstein from Medway Council, and my Create Streets colleagues Tom Noble and Ed Leahy are speaking to you from London. Okay, so I'm just going to give it another 30 seconds or so, and then we will kick off. So imagine that there is pleasing music playing at you at the moment. Okay. Well, we've got a good range of people now in the chat, not in the chat, in the press room. So we will kick off. Good afternoon. My name is Nicholas Boyce-Smith. I am the chair and the founder of Create Streets. We were delighted last year and earlier this year to work with Medway Council and the Thames Gateway Partnership. If you could just bring up the slides, please, Tom. And today we're just going to be you will be out in an hour's time. And today we're going to be talking to you, Design to Deliver, how we picked up some of the best practice being used elsewhere to de-risk development on infill sites in Medway, and some of the consequences and implications of that, and some of the other work going on. And as I say, we'll get you out by past. If you just give me the next slide, please, Tom. I'll give you an intro to Create Streets, and David will give you an introduction to Quintain Consulting quickly, and then we'll talk about viability trap and some of the examples around the country and internationally. And myself, my colleague Ed Leahy, and my colleague Tom Noble will talk to that. And then Tom and Duncan Bernstein from Medway Council, who's always present in a colourful shirt and with a nice book backdrop, we'll talk about what got on Medway. And then as fast as possible, we'll get to Q&A. And as I say, you will get out by 1:30 at the latest. Next slide, please, Tom. For next slide. So just quickly, so you know, Create Streets is a social enterprise with an associated charity, the Create Streets Foundation. We're a little bit sui generis, a little bit peculiar, and we delight in our peculiarity. So at the heart of what we do, the kernel, is research into the relationship between place and outcomes for humans. Where do people prosper? Where do they know their neighbours? What types of development patterns embed resilient and sustainable living patterns, and what types of development patterns and architecture and placemaking incentivize and encourage people to support development and investment in places. So we're very interested in that overlap between preferences, behavior, and the physics of a place. So that's the heart of what we do. And then to bring that to life and to make it real, we do a lot of community engagement. We have a methodology of engage deep and engage wide. So we don't run workshops in sort of planning rooms. We go to summer fairs or Christmas markets and set up a stall and ask people to come to us. We always engage visually, and we have a series of online platforms that we use to empower customer preferences. And then we bring that to life with master planning, design coding, and increasingly are also involved with education. We run CPD accredited courses. In fact, I'm speaking to you for one of them in Sherborne, where we're running our annual summer school. That's enough from me. David, an introduction to Quintain Consulting before we get into the detail. And yes. Do we have a slide on Quintain Consulting? I don't think we do.
No, we'll just leave it as it is there, Nicholas. So no, just to say really the context as well. So I'm David Godfrey, as Nicholas said, Quintain Consulting now, working independently, but I was at the Thames Estuary Growth Board and indeed Kent County Council, and it was through the Thames Estuary Growth Board that this work was commissioned as part of our work around accelerating delivery in the estuary. We saw design as a way of doing that, de-risking and acceleration, and it was great to be able to do it as part of the programme, which was generously hosted by MHCLG and Homes England, of which I know we've got people on the call. What we were very keen to do was look at not only how you could accelerate, but also make sure you're building the kind of places people wanted to live in. And that's why we were really pleased to do this with Create Streets, and indeed to work with Duncan, Vince Maple, the leader of Medway, and colleagues there with Nicholas and Tom to produce a small sites design code, which you'll hear within the context of the wider work of Create Streets through the seminar today. Just to say very timely as well, with obviously debates on the NPPF yesterday, the London plan now, obviously spatial planning, local government reorganisation, lots of things, all will have some sort of impact, but certainly through London plan and NPPF encouragement for design coding, and the kind of vehicles that can accelerate that delivery. So really, just to pass back to you, Nicholas, and thanks to you, Tom, and colleagues, and Duncan, in terms of what you've done here. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, David. And I think over to my colleague, Tom, who will just talk through the starts of what we did. Tom, are you there? Hopefully Tom is there.
I think you're muted, Tom.
Tom, we can't hear you. Excellent, marvelous. We've had a technical fail. Tom, if you just go to the next screen, I'll start while you're sorting out your. If you can just go to the next screen, Tom, because you have the things. Excellent. That's what I like to see. Nice, nice technical fail. So look, I'll just talk to this for 2 seconds while Tom is sorting out his microphone. Tom, have you sorted out your microphone? No, Tom has not sorted out his microphone. This is fun. As you all know from some years ago, in the NPPF is more support for design coding, and specifically support in growing interest is in the London plan literally the other day, and it's more encouraged. It's the New Towns Task Force talk about it, new versions of the NPPF talk about other mechanisms to bring forward development and to bring the democracy forward. I just want to see if Tom's microphone is working now.
Can we hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. So I'll hand back to you.
I have no idea what happened there.
Don't worry. These things are sent us. These things are sent to try us.
Absolutely, it was working perfectly before. But no, thank you very much for that. So, so I'll just give a quick overview of what we did in Chatham. So we previously worked in Chatham, and Duncan will follow on from this shortly to deliver the neighbourhood design code and support with an area-wide design code. So we built on that work to create a package that would help take those to the next level and really sort of de-risk development. So that included a very detailed design code that built on other design codes we had, a pattern book of house types, master plans, and a set of analyses to support all that. So just a quick note on some of the mechanisms that councils have at their disposal. Firstly, the planning authority. So I'm sure you're quite familiar with these, but firstly, SPDs, which have been used very successfully before, and we've used them in Lichfield. Specifically now, supplementary plans, which replace them, which have a bit more weight. They obviously don't grant planning permission, but they do go a long way to set very clear requirements for what you can actually build, and that can include design codes. The next step would be something like a local development order. So everyone's probably very familiar with LDOs, but not very familiar with NDOs or MDOs. So neighbourhood development orders are the same as an LDO, but at that parish level. And they're not widely used, but we think it could be a very powerful tool, which has the added advantage of requiring local democracy, as it needs a referendum, much like a neighbourhood plan. And then the newest tool is the mayoral development order. That's been on the statute for a while, but the legislation to make them possible is, I believe, been made, and also they are being extended from London to the new mayoral authorities as well. So I think that's one to watch. And lastly, there are simplified planning zones, SPZ. They are a little bit rare, but they're an incredibly powerful tool. It's a bit of a dark horse. Very successful use in Slough, in the trading parks there. And one interesting thing about that is it does allow local plan policies to be overridden if necessary, unlike some of the other documentation which must be in line with it. I think as well it's worth pointing out what councils can do as landowners and landowners in general. Councils do own a lot of
sorry to interrupt, Tom. I mean, just worth saying, obviously some of you know this, but just in case you don't all, particularly actually in less prosperous towns, councils do own surprising, sometimes staggering amounts of the brownfield land. That's only what we find in our work. Most of you will know that, but you may not all. Sorry to interrupt, Tom.
Not at all. So there are a few mechanisms we identified there, and ones that have been used successfully. So obvious one being selling with planning permission already, which things can change with that, but that does give you a good level of control. But then there is costs and risk associated with that. Selling with restrictions through restricted covenants on the deeds, etc., is quite a common tool, and a very good precedent is in Fairford Leys in Buckinghamshire. That was developed in the 90s by a landowning trust. There was a lot of pushback against using those conditions and using the code, but it did mandate a certain master plan and a certain design code. and I think some decommissioned research showing that it would be unviable to do, but in the end they were vindicated. Very successful development, award-winning, more valuable than surrounding similar developments, and big successful round, I would say. And then we could also look at sort of a bit of a combination of that. And councils are in that unique position of also having the planning powers. So I'm now just going to hand over to Nicholas, who will talk a bit about our slightly odd planning system and how that affects our viability.
And if you just go to the next slide. So look, I promise you I'm not going to do a detailed deep dive into planning and building regs across Europe, because life is not long enough. But and a couple of you may have heard me say this before, because it is so important and it cannot be overstressed. Obviously, we live in a common law system with statute, and obviously the 1947 Town and Country Planning Act and then the series of subsequent statutes have set the framework in which we all operate. The local plan is a policy document, and as you all know, different policies in that interact. You need to have a judgment as to what the appropriate and best possible application of those is, often their intention, and then obviously highways, building regs and other things are pertinent as well. The reason I say that is to remind you all of that fact, but then to stress how different that is to the system that pertains in differing ways and in differing degrees in most of Europe, where obviously they were all more influenced by the Code of Napoleon, because they got invaded by Napoleon, unlike us. Now, there are downsides and upsides. This is not a sort of everything's good in the continent, everything's bad in England, or UK, I should say, type comparison. There are actually downsides and upsides to both approaches, but what is typically the case in varying degrees in most, in fact, pretty much all of Europe, the partial exceptions of Portugal and to a greater extent Ireland, is that you have a local code d'urbanisation in French. It's got different names, obviously, in different languages in different places, and that's more like our building regs. So it's far more compliance based. It's either yes or a no. It's more tick box. There are downsides to that. It's actually, frankly, less able to cope with nuance or complicated situations. Some would argue it's less capable of coping with new developments. Certainly done badly, as in is often the case in America, which is actually in some ways is more similar to Europe than to us. If you mandate the wrong thing, that's actually disastrous. And I think one could argue that happens in America. So I'm not saying everything's great in Europe and bad in the UK. That's not the logic. But there is an upside to the European approach as well as downsides. And the upside is this, which is that if you've got very clear stipulations for smaller plot by plot development, and by taking out all of that pre-planning cost and risk and time, and obviously the amount of cost and difficulty involved with getting planning permission for a small site does not reduce proportionately with the size. So the upside of those other systems is that done well, done clearly, plot by plot intensification or development becomes more comparatively economically viable. And we see that. One of the ways we see that is that with a few exceptions, there's much less of a housing crisis and undersupply in houses in much, though not all of Europe. Next slide, please. One consequence of that is that we have the smallest share of SMEs or local house builders building properties and homes and development in the UK versus basically anywhere else where you've got reasonable data. It's very hard to do this as an apples by apples comparison, because obviously every country cuts it slightly differently. It's not something that's properly done at an EU level. Obviously that wouldn't apply to us now anymore. But I've never seen a study which doesn't have us either at the bottom or very, very close to the bottom. And I would argue, and I think others have argued, that's a direct consequence of the fact that big development is much more relatively economically viable for us because of all those upfront risks and costs. We're very reliant, as you doubtless all know, and we may have representatives on the call on the volume house builders and the big, very well-funded developers. That's not a criticism of them. It's just how do we turn back on the plot by plot intensification, which is obviously a more sustainable way of doing development and also lower costs, because you can make better, more intense use of existing infrastructure. I mean, the extreme case for this obviously is the greenbelt land next to a train station, but there are many more, if you like, less extreme cases of abilities to go up or intensify close to existing roads, close to existing train stations, or other bits of public transport. Next slide, please, Tom. This is me, isn't it? This slide, yes. So based on some of the economics we did on this studies, but also economics we're starting to work up for some research, a lot is asked of small brownfield sites, infrastructure requirements, sometimes affordable housing if it goes above a certain size, certainly the need to win planning permission. Some of the numbers we've done, and this will be very contingent on where, estimates that de-risking development reduces the viability gap for anywhere between 25 to 50%. I think those numbers obviously quite a range there. And it does so by reducing the fees, the planning fees, the legal fees, that you need to pay up front. It reduces the cost of capital because obviously higher risk investment, which anything pre-planning permission is a higher cost of capital. It's an equity style cost, not a debt style cost. Speeds up the process, which obviously equates to money, and it opens up development to a wider range of developers, some of whom may be, and indeed definitely will be, happy to take a lower return on capital. So the point of this conversation, part of our work in Chatham and our work and other people's work elsewhere, is to say, how do we, in a risk sensible way, turn on plot by plot intensification and a wider range of developers without the same need for public subsidy to be intensifying. This is not fully published yet, but we've got a research paper we're currently working on, Passport to Prosperity. I actually talked about these numbers and evidence I was giving to the GLA Planning and Regen Committee the other day. Just looking at the opportunities for intensification and even applying very low percentages for what proportions of buildings and homes up and down the country did intensify, either placing with a small block of flats or just going up a story or two, you get to very, very high numbers, even with low estimates of uptick of homes between 1.7 and 3.6 million, and bedrooms between 3.8 to 7.9 additional bedrooms. And just worth stressing there as a quick aside, although obviously housing targets are only on houses, bedrooms matter a lot for reducing the paths to homelessness. Next slide, and then I think it's back to Tom. Yes, so go on to the next slide, and then it's was this me? No, this is me, isn't it? So one thing we see in other countries which have that type of system is you get pass and book housing provided by the market, which is compliant with local or with the wider policy. So here you could literally see patterns of houses, on the market now or very recently in Sweden and in America that are code compliant and compliant with local policy. They fit the parameters or they fit the requirements, and the market just accepts. And that's another reason why you get far more self-build or custom build in most of these countries, because it's easy to see what you can or can't do. Next slide, please. And I think I now hand over to Ed, who will give an example of a version of this happening in Lichfield.
Yes, I'll do it hopefully in 2 minutes. It's 4 years worth of work, so it might be a challenge, but nice to see you all here. I will rattle through this. So this is a good example of everything that Nicholas and Tom just been speaking about, in that it's a site design code we did for this site in Lichfield, which is a very beautiful city up in Staffordshire. And the site in question, you can see outlined here, has effectively been a bit of a wasteland for the last over 2 decades, 25 years. And it sits between the lovely city centre and the train station. And it had several failed development schemes proposed over those decades, notably some large leisure retail complexes that all fell through for various reasons. Not least, they were hugely unpopular with residents. So we were brought on by the council over 4 years ago to kind of start afresh and see if we can build local popular consensus for what this site should be, how it should look, how it should develop, and effectively through quite a widespread community engagement program that lasted around 6 to 8 months. We created a design code, which then very quickly led to being translated into planning applications coming forward. And now the first phase is planning application is in for 146 homes. So in a very short space of time, with popular consent, we sort of unlocked what was an extremely stubborn site. So just to unpack that a bit, Tom, if you go to the next slide. That community engagement piece I spoke about, absolutely crucial to kind of get that confidence, and then down the line give developers and builders confidence in what they're doing, that you've got public backing. And We did our Create Communities online platform. Some of you may have come across it. I do encourage you to check our website out. It's effectively a really simple mapping platform that allows people to just drop pins and leave comments on what they love or what they hate about the city, what types of buildings they want to see, and how they want the site to develop. So we got nearly 6,000 responses on that, and then we follow that up with 3 public workshops where, as Nicholas mentioned, we go into town, the Christmas fairs, the summer fates, etc., and add that qualitative human dimension, talking to people on the ground. And if you go to the next slide, Tom, that allows us to build up a really sort of large data bank, if you will, of what people are saying, what people want, and you get these really clear outcomes. They want this type of windows, they want these types of bricks, they love these types of streets and public realm, and they don't like X, Y, Z. And then so we can take all that, put it into our site design code, do it really visually. This was only 60 pages, quite short, lots of diagrams, measurements, etc. And then that was adopted. And as part of any condition of the sale of the land, the developer had to abide by the code. So the first parcel was this just a few years ago. It's a bit of an eyesore. And using that code, it basically quickly gave developers certainty about what this area and site is going to be. It gave them certainty and much less risk on the designs they need to deliver. And if you go to the next slide, that site now has planning application for this. This is the latest design render of what they're putting forward. Is for 146 homes, which on half a hectare site is over 200 dph. So that is actually incredibly dense by English standards, but as was said in council, it doesn't look dense. And that density has allowed actually viability to unlock underground car parking, which in this country is kind of astonishing. It almost never happens. So that means there's no cars on the streets and at the surface level, which means more trees, more greenery, more public realm. And there's a couple more images, but I'll stop there in the interest of not being screamed at by Nicholas.
No. That was adequately on time. Well done, Ed. So we'll go to the next slide, which I think is back to
me. So no, thank you very much, Ed. But yeah, perfectly timed, very concise. So just a few examples of where good things are happening across the UK. So South Tottenham in Haringey is a really, really interesting area. There is a SPD there that's been in place for, I think, a good decade now, particularly acute housing challenges and lots of extensions happening. So the council very practically decided to regulise what was happening and create a very simple design code essentially to allow people to extend their homes by 1.5 stories. I'm sort of quite familiar there, and it has been sort of grown up nicely over the last few years. And over a generation, perhaps this whole area will just be a little bit taller, but without really impacting massively the character of that area. It is just a very simple 1-story extension on existing homes. Another interesting example, this is very recent, and this is using an LDO as a tool, is in RBKC. Obviously, lots of demand for floor space there. Lots of homes which are suitable for mansards, as they have the sort of very traditional butterfly roofs on many of the homes there. This particular street had a couple of sort of missing couple of mansards already, which was sort of low standard, and quite a long stretch without, and it was felt that the simplest thing to do was, rather than get all these piecemeal applications, would be to do a simple LDO that covers the whole street. They made that in 2024. Again, very simple, straightforward document, and within just 18 months, I think more than, well, now probably half the homes are being mansarded, if that is a word. But it just, I think that really sort of highlights the speed at which the SMEs and the market can respond when there is demand, and we loosen up the restrictions. RBKC is also interesting for the basement policies they had, where again they simplified the planning rules, and that did lead to a very quick boom in basements, which obviously have their issues, but it does just show how when planning allows it, like the market will respond, especially the SME market. Tower Hamlets also did something similar, this time with an SPD, and that was hugely successful. You can see the numbers there in terms of the increase in successful applications. Good news is they've now rolled this out across 3 other conservation areas, so hundreds of homes covered by this, potentially creating many hundreds of bedrooms in that area, which again is an area of acute demand, and in a way that is very respectful of the history and the character of that area. An approach we'd really like to see emulated elsewhere. Graven Hill's another interesting LDO site. Those familiar with it is a I think it's the largest self-build development in the UK, all covered by an LDO, which basically allows residents to purchase a plot of land with planning permission and with a very clear rules on what they can build. Obviously, they're just building a plot, so they still need to decide what to build. So if they follow the design code and the site is the design is deemed to be in line with that, they can get approval in about 28 days. And that has been been a really rapid uptake on that, and again, very successful process. And then I think one of the largest LDOs, one of the most interesting, is in Cornwall, in Nans Leddon. It's a huge development there, up to 3,700 homes. That's quite a unique model, as it has a master developer and landowner being the Duchy, and then a range of SME builders building out various sites and plots. Using the LDO, they can really sort of speed up the approval processes, and that allows this competition between SMEs, which has really sort of pushed up standards and enabled them to support some very sort of long-term thinking in terms of the infrastructure and the placemaking there. And I will now hand over to Nicholas, who will talk about a scheme which had some success, but perhaps its faults as well.
Yeah, look, nothing in life is free, and I'll give you just a quick example in the UK and then a sort of interesting example in America, just deliberately to widen it a bit. So many of you, particularly those of you who are working in London, may be aware of the 2019 Croydon Suburban Design Guide. Now some people look at that and say it's a great success. In the course of a few years, it led to enormous increase in the number of homes, which it definitely did. It basically made it very, very easy to demolish some of the early 20th century housing you can see in front on the left-hand side and replace it with box flats, 3 stories, or even on corner plots 4 stories high. It was an undoubted numerical success. However, and I think this does, I don't think there are probably many politicians on the call. It was a political complete car crash. So it was a Labour-run administration at the time. Unsurprisingly, Conservative opposition ran against it. I think that's probably not that surprising. But here's the key fact. At the first mayoral election for Croydon a few years ago, so did the Labour mayoral candidate, Val Shawcross. So both parties were under, and I haven't got them all up on this slide, but there's a series of quotes in the media from the time with both the Tory and the Labour mayoral candidate saying the houses that are being done don't fit in, doesn't feel of here, can't really support this. And so uniquely in the anti-Conservative swing in local government votes a few years ago, Croydon went to the Conservatives. I'm not making any views on that, whether it's good or bad, but the point is that was clearly, certainly speaking to anyone who's involved, it was clearly one of the primary, if not the primary factor for that. And it led to a weird unity of both the party that created it and the opposition arguing against it. And not surprisingly, the Conservative mayoral candidate, when he came in, then ripped up the policy. And I have to say, I've had various conversations, as perhaps some of you have, with councillors from several political parties across London who reference this as what they don't want to do. So next slide, please, Tom. Why did this happen? Well, if you look at the supplementary guide, which is still available online, and I have, 2 things jump out. The first is that much of Croydon affected by this, not all, was what Osbert Lancaster called stockbroker Tudor. Now, you may like it or you may not like it, but it's of a certain type, early 20th century, quite a lot of detached houses, Tudor Beetham, faux wood beams. You can see a contemporary photo and a popular cartoon from the early 20th century that typifies it. And if you Google Street walk around the streets, that's what you see a lot of. Now, in front of you on the right-hand side, the design guide basically allowed you to do whatever you liked. It quoted the picture you can see in the bottom left there, those 3 red things, as an appropriate contextual response. That was one that was actually apparently already in planning. I don't know whether those were built or not. And then it suggested 3 different design responses to the normal streets. One was the ambitiously aggressive and austere version above that, the aluminium whatever box. Bottom right was a sort of modern take on historical, and then on the top right, it's actually a not very good copy of a traditional Victorian building with a bad window reveal and bad window sills there, but that's by the by. The point is actually even so the first thing is they didn't in any way reference what was actually local. It was barely, in fact, it wasn't visualized at all in the entire design guide. The second thing is all of their responses in different ways were not actually relevant. So anyone, and we know from statistics, most people do like places to evolve in ways that they recognize. Most people don't like a radical change to place. Again, you may disagree with that or agree with it, but it's a statistical fact that they don't. But literally none of the case studies or examples they cited in any way reference the local character. Even weirdly, the one that they said was an example of something that did reference local character. So anyway, not surprisingly, lots of the local media at the time say this is offensive to what's going on here. Next slide, please, because we just move on. So there's an example of how not to do it. Just as a quick aside, just because you've got different planning systems in other countries doesn't mean it's easy to do. So in fact, under the zoning system that is common in the US, very often there are, and this is my point about the danger of specificity if you specify the wrong thing, very often there are specific requirements about surface area, about staircases, about share of plot that actually make it impossible to intensify. A rare example, or rare-ish example, is getting better in America, of that ceasing to be the case is for this street, Kennedy Street in Washington, D.C., where some years ago, about just over 10 years ago, a rewrite of the local zoning ordinances has basically made it much easier to intensify. And that is leading to intensification. Now, to my English eyes, and you can see an example of that in the bottom right. Now, I've said to my English eyes that that's not very attractive to the street. There doesn't seem to be huge pushback happening in America. So maybe that's because Americans are different to the English. I'll leave that to you to decide. Maybe it's because of the way the local politics runs through. I had a long chat with a guy who lives close to there, and he said that he thought on balance the change had been beneficial because although it wasn't very attractive, it did mean there were more people living and working in the area. That led to more activity and that made it a better and safer place. And I totally respect that. Next slide, please. As a sort of an example, and there you can see some of the interventions that have happened essentially through the change of the zoning ordinances 10 years ago. They're just popping up basically plot by plot almost everywhere now across that street, which I walked down a few months ago. Next slide, please. As a sort of almost as a notional exercise, actually with help from Ed, we just did a quick visual preference survey of the British population. It's obviously not directly relevant to an American street, because we were just interested in seeing, given the problems that had happened in Croydon, given the fact that we knew that politically didn't work in the UK, where you didn't have a view on design, or what would be the views of the British public. And although this is an American street, it's not a completely alien concept, I think, to our British eyes. It's clearly derivative to some degree of British architecture. So we put in, as you can see, a more, and bluntly, knowing what the public tend to prefer, a slightly more traditional facade pattern of similar, or I think almost greater surface volume, and asked people which they preferred. You can see the numbers on the screen, and if you just go to the next slide, we did two images, again showing the same density. What's interesting, and I think worthy of note, is that it isn't just that a very strong majority preferred, if you like, the more contextual response. That preference was held across every single social demographic: left wing, right wing, no wing at all, rich, poor, male, female, rich, north, south, east, west, London, non-London. So it's a very, very consistent thing. So I think we create streets, we're speaking only for ourselves, would draw a conclusion that this works better when you're respectful of places, certainly in the UK. And I think that's the bit for me. So next slide, please. Yes, just two quick things. So we are getting a lot of interest in this sort of politically. The GLA Planning Committee has done reports on this. Actually, I was giving evidence on how you can intensify existing buildings through mansards or others literally last week. The gentleman who's talking in that picture on the right is a chap with a PhD in structural engineering of intensification. He was agreeing that this is something that's very physically doable, as well as doable in planning terms if you want it to be locally. It's not doable unless you want it to be. Next slide, please. Tom.
I think things are moving, and the new draft London plan was out yesterday, and I haven't read it line by line, but from what I've seen, it is very supportive of this approach, which is, I think, very exciting. It references local development orders and perhaps mayoral development orders and the upcoming small sites design code. So we are moving to more of a sort of de facto zoning type system almost for intensification. And also it gives the advice that local authorities should, when making these additional design codes or LDOs, should consider local design and local architecture, which I think was one of the key lessons from the Croydon scheme there. So I think, watch this space, potentially exciting things happening within London. I'm now just going to hand over to Duncan briefly to give us a quick intro into our work with him in Medway. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. It's always a great pleasure to hear the Create Streets talk about this sort of work, because it's actually a privilege, I think, we find to have that level of conversation actually happening in the borough. I'm Duncan Burns. I'm a senior architect and urban designer here at Medway. We've been undertaking design coding, particularly in Chatham, but also now expanding out to other parts of Medway for the last, I guess, 2, 3, perhaps 4 years. We've got two predominant ones in Chatham. One is the right-hand one you see here, which is a design code produced within a neighbourhood planning context for Arches Local, which Create Streets work with them, as Tom mentioned earlier on. I think actually what's really interesting about that particular code and that particular work from my point of view, is that it got such a resounding endorsement from the community, and in fact still now holds something of a position of legend within conversations in terms of just how much they've been able to respond to it and so on. So it really empowered them, and I think that was particularly gratifying, actually, because we've very often found we're historically, of course, we've been more distant from communities, which is not where we want to be at all. The left-hand image here, the Chatham Design Code, you may be familiar with, was a pathfinder. We were selected as one of the pathfinders by MHCLG to undertake a design code for Chatham Town Centre. You might want to go on to the next slide, Tom. As many of you will be familiar, design codes it's a form-based design code. It's a form-based approach. The design code, of course, sets parameters in much the same way as Nicholas and Tom and others have been discussing. And it's been adopted by Medway Council. Of course, the neighbourhood one was through referendum. This has been adopted by the council. And something that's worth mentioning, I think, is that we had harboured before the design code the ambition for Chatham being a low-rise town, and we'd be consistently told by developers actually that wasn't possible, and things had to be tall, and we'd been resisting it for some time. The thing that became clear from this, quite beyond the parameters, the specifics of the parameters, what the design code gave us was it gave us a business plan essentially for the town. We understood the volume of development that the town could accommodate with the ambition we had. And picking up Nicholas's previous point, 80% of the development land is actually owned by Medway Council in the town centre development land, and it's a piece of our land actually that we're now testing and working with Create Streets on, which Tom will take you through shortly, I guess. We do, picking up Nicholas's point earlier, viability challenge is exactly where we are at the moment in Chatham, and in the discussions we were having with MHCLG as well, the point was that we didn't want to simply draw a code and have parameters. We wanted to really demonstrate de-risking through implementation. And this has been the great opportunity working with Create Streets on this, and David, and the viability, the irony, counterintuitive irony to begin with, and not to Nicholas and so on, but I'm so glad they're placing this rationale now properly, but is that we have an ambition to be a low-rise town, and say low-rise, I mean by that really mid-rise, up to 6 stories, and that is supported by the viability challenges as well, because the changes to building regulations and various things more recently make high-rise more expensive and more difficult to deliver. So there's lots to be discussed on it. We've also worked with narrow plots in the thing as well, in the design code as well. So it's probably enough for me right now, and I'll hand back, and then we can pick up some questions a little later.
Thank you, Duncan. And just Tom, before you go, just to flag up, and a couple of you already have, do please put questions in the chat, and we'll get to that very, very soon.
Great.
Tom.
Thank you, Duncan. So, given those brilliant design codes, which cover sort of those 2 different levels, so the district and the neighbourhood, we were able to produce a very site-specific code. And the whole idea behind that is we build on the work that's been done, the consultation that's been done for those codes to sort of bring the democracy forward, take all that engagement and embed it in our code, particularly the house types. So the previous engagement included lots of preference surveys on what kind of buildings people would like to see, with many sort of examples from across the country. You'll probably recognise some of them there. All And you can see there the sort of themes that emerged around scale, height, colour, enclosure, greenery, etc. And in the Archers Code, neighbourhood code, they put in some precedents which they really liked and would like to see brought forward in Chatham. So we took that and used it to develop essentially a pattern book of house types. This was all based on a standard plot size. So think of this very much as a sort of, a Lego brick. So we can really easily sort of create master plans, flex them, adapt them, interchange buildings, etc. So 3 types: large homes, small homes, and then larger mansion blocks or blocks of flats. So just talk through some of those now. Firstly, some larger homes, both referencing the sort of the history of Chatham a bit. So the one on the right meant to be a little bit more industrial, and the ones on the left emulating some of the really amazing Georgian terraces that are present around the dockside. And then smaller homes, which reference the Victorian vernacular around the Archers area in particular, and with some variations there, particularly ones with garages that we could use to create muse streets, and then move into some larger flats, again both referencing local styles. So Art Deco buildings were very popular in the visual preference surveys we did, and there's some real gems on the high street, but also Chatham being a very sort of industrial naval town, there were some really amazing warehouse buildings as well, which we wanted to reference in our design. And then very simply, we took 2 prime sites, both of which were council owned, both been slated development for a long time, and both have fallen through a couple of times for various reasons. And so we wanted to see how this approach could apply to them. So we developed 2 very simple master plans based on this plot by plot approach. Firstly, by setting out the plots, applying these house types to them, and then playing with those numbers and those arrangements until we got something that we thought was acceptable and viable as well. So in the end, over sort of 200 homes, really reasonably high densities considering where they are and considering the scale as well. So I think we were matching the densities that were previously achieved by some rather large towers and rather large blocks. So I think a real win for this approach. And just some quick visualizations there, street elevation, and a quick visualization of a sort of alternative design where we've flipped things around a bit, just showing how they would all work together. So I'll just hand over to Nicholas now. So we've got some time for Q&A, and then we can talk about some next steps on this approach, where we want to take it, hopefully how we can help you as well. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. So do put your questions, please, into the Q&A. We've had one so far, which is actually a very good one. I'm very grateful you've asked it, and we should probably have spontaneously asked it, which is from Alison. Sorry, Alison, I don't know your surname. Is there an agreed level of affordable housing, I assume, across an LDO, which may differ from overarching local authority levels? I can partly answer that, but Tom, do you want to take that, or should I answer that?
Yeah, over to you.
Okay, so you can't, under an LDO, require developers to enter into a Section 106 agreement. What you can, however, do is to stipulate with for an LDO above a certain size, i.e. 10 homes, I assume 10 homes, you can require affordable housing. So you can put affordable housing into an LDO. Clearly, for the plot by plot type, where you're increasing, presumably either just increasing the number of bedrooms or adding one home, or just increasing a small number of homes, I think it would not be normal, and indeed I think in some cases not possible to do that. So for plot by plot is unlikely to be pertinent. For larger ones, you can build it into the LDO. Obviously, you need to be thoughtful about affordability, but you can't then require the Section 106. So very much similar to sort of the wider logic on LDOs. To some degree, you're bringing the policy and the democracy forward rather than leaving it to case by case negotiation. So you do need to do the right thing to ensure viability and deliverability, but you can't sort of leave it up to discussion. Tom, is that say if you disagree with any of that? Otherwise that's
no,
our answer.
I think that's correct.
Right. Okay. And so other questions are: someone has just put in a link to plot by plot thinking. Then Alex Simmons has asked 2 questions, which I assume, I'm not sure who it's for. How important was the in-person versus online engagement? Can you do online only, or do you lose something essential? And did you curate the photos showing options for different designs, or did the public also contribute to them? Tom, do you want to say something like that in Chatham, and then maybe Ed and Duncan as well, quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I think you're right. You would lose something essential with the if you miss the in-person stuff. Not everyone is online. You do miss people, and it's also just been able to grab even 2-3 minutes of someone's time to talk through these things. Sometimes people are sort of concerned when you're presenting this stuff, and were you trying to build big, huge buildings in our town? 4 stories sometimes sounds scary. When you sort of show them things and explain them, that really helps. And yeah, I would say the in-person workshops that were part of both the neighbourhood code and the district code were really essential. In terms of creating the photos, I assume that means the sort of new designs for Chatham. Where this one is, we're not sort of quite at the point where we've gone back to the public on those designs, but the idea was they're very much designed on what people have told us already, what we know they've said they prefer, and what we think is locally appropriate and what they think would be locally appropriate. A better example would be our work in Chesham, where we had a very long engagement process where we really iterated house types and designs at both online events, but then also things like the summer fete, the Christmas market. We'd go there and present our designs and get feedback, adjust them accordingly until we were happy with them, and we're confident that people would support them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Ed, I might just ask, just because you did a lot of work on this in Lichfield, Ed, I might just ask for 45 seconds from you on that. And then, Duncan, I'm going to come back to you on another question, actually, if that's okay.
No problem.
Ed, just from Lichfield.
Tom nailed it already. I mean, I would just add that on the in-person point, what really strikes me always is how much people really care about this kind of stuff. And sometimes these debates get reduced to basically just like heights and massing, and that's all people care about. They just want to make sure development is just as small and out the way as possible. But actually, you get sort of 10-year-olds coming up to us saying, please make the grey cladding stop, or sort of ordinary members of the public just saying, I want more sash windows. It's quite amazing how detailed and sort of on it they are. And it's not just a case of they just don't want homes and they want it to be -5 stories or whatever. They really care about the materiality, the field and the look of new development.
Thank you, Ed. Duncan, I think this is a good question for you from Judgley Susbo, I think, if I pronounce that correctly. What kind of considerations do you need to make in regards of public transport and parking? I think with your sort of your Medway wide remit, I think that's a good question to give to you.
It's
passing the poison chalice.
Exactly. It's a challenge everywhere, isn't it? Let's be frank about it. We have an ambition that sits very much it's articulated through design code to reduce car parking in the town centre. We are fortunate to have 3 stations in reasonable proximity, and bus services link them. And so we have had downward pressure in the town centres now for some time. We are beginning to develop schemes with 0 car parking when they're really close. And we're at 0.3 when they're a little bit more distant, so they're considerably reduced. The challenge, I think, in part is to deal with our car parking strategy, because because it's a transition. At the moment, it's nowhere near those figures. And prior to the current downward pressure, it was 1.25 for the centre of the town, as much as it would have been in other areas. So it's a very big shift. The other thing we have done as part of the coding work, we did look at the transport system more widely. And what we found was that and I think this is why the strategic question you mentioned, Nicholas, is important. We found with adjustments on the transport system on the periphery of the towns, we could stop an enormous volume of traffic using rat runs, basically, which then filled up the town centre. And what that's allowed is for us to consider, and this is in the code actually, the narrowing of the brook, the creating of cycle and foot traffic, and considering it then as a street rather than a transport corridor. So I think you're absolutely right. It's 2 scales.
That's something that's considering a street. A street's always like create streets, not roads. I'm now going to just run two questions together. In fact, three questions together, which I'll give to Tom first. So Duncan or Ed, do come if you want.
Yeah.
So, question from Greg Wilkinson: is there any applicability for some of these policies in incentivizing conversions of upper floor commercial units into residential? And then the two questions about modern methods of construction. One of them kindly says it's for me, but actually Tom's an engineer, so I'm going to pass that on. I'm going to pass that on to Tom.
Well, former. But
once an engineer, never an engineer. You can't escape, Tom. You can't escape.
I'm afraid so. So yeah, Greg. Yeah, really interesting question. From what I understand, a lot of the problems around converting the upper floors above, flats above shops is around building regs, not just planning. So I couldn't confidently answer whether just through planning we could incentivize that, but I imagine there could be some hooks through various orders and things like that if we needed to. But what it can definitely help with is thinking about actually where you could potentially add 1 or 2 stories on top of these buildings as well, and taking that approach of a code and development order, particularly around sort of high streets. I think that's really going to be a key issue, is getting more people living in high streets. So hopefully we can do that. On MMC, yeah, really interesting one. And someone said it to me in a really, I think it really put this in a really interesting way, is that we can't mass produce homes until we mass produce planning permissions, because of all the changes that are needed to every design. So the beauty of a sort of approach like this, where we take a pattern book and LDO, is we do have a set plot size, we have a set house size, we have set styles. Within those, you can have lots of variety. So we could take one of our pattern book buildings, and I think we did this in Chatham quite a lot, was just change the materials, change the window types, but keep all those proportions and things the same. So the things that would affect the sort of the bones of the building. So I think there is a really interesting opportunity to support MMC via these sort of tools.
Yeah, I would. Sorry, go, Duncan, just quickly.
If you wanted me just to add one thing on this subject, I think one of the really interesting things I think about this as a methodology is that it doesn't only apply to development above small commercial units in high streets. And one of the things we're considering here is far more strategically, how can we start to think in this way about, for instance, industrial premises, where we don't want to demolish them in the interests of the circular economy and all the environmental imperatives we have. And then how can we therefore undertake industrial retrofit while also being able to build in many of the attributes that Great Streets are talking about here. So I think it's a really exciting time, Nicholas, actually, for this.
And indeed, some of the use of LDOs and SPZs has been on industrial sites. So I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Can I just quickly give a question to Ed, which may be unfair, so apologies if it is. 2 questions on car parking ventilation. Ed, I'll have to ask you to be quick because we've only got 3 minutes left before we wrap up at the moment. Is the underground car park mechanically ventilated? You may not know. And then also the level of density that was used to unlock underground parking. Ed, you're our best chance at answering those. And then I'm going to quickly come back on section 106 and Sil.
I don't know the mechanically ventilated question. It will probably be in the planning application, which is on the portal. Tom may know better than I do. I'm not so much in the detail, but they're all very good questions on the parking. And I particularly like the one about what density is required. And I love the idea of some kind of, you can imagine a scale of densities that allows you to unlock different amenities, but obviously that will be contingent on the place and the values that you're able to realize. But I think the bigger question from that is, if we're able, as long as we do density well, or density as we call it, and make it such that it's not sort of hated by the public, then that's the prize that we get from being able to do density, and we can unlock things like underground parking or offsite contributions for XYZ. So it's a really exciting horizon, definitely.
One of the things that certainly is true, I think, through a combination of reduced planning risk and possibly some regulatory change or differences, is that underground parking is, as a statement of fact, more viable in many sort of, if you like, mid-range sites, in parts, so not all of continental Europe, than it is in the UK. Right, we've got moments to spare. 2 questions about SIL in section 106, which, unless anyone else wants to come in, I'll take very briefly. Someone's saying you can do section 106 under SIL, under LDOs. I haven't got the law in front of me. It's possible I'm misunderstanding. I don't believe you can, but you can do the same by mandating within the within the LDO, essentially requirements on affordable housing or indeed other things as part of the
can
LDO.
do a unilateral undertaking, I believe, as part of an LDO, and that's what they did in, I forget which site they looked at, just to have some.
But you
planning.
can't mandate the Section 106. I don't think. Can you? I think
developer
can choose to do it, but I don't think
you
you can't mandate a Section 106, but they can choose to do things.
I don't know the exact mechanisms, but there was a site where they did manage to have basically sort of get a little bit of funding towards a kind of street improvement fund as part of the LDO approach, which I think was quite an interesting idea that could realise some wider benefits for this sort of approach. But on the precise legal details, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think it's not the same, but you can. So I think it's the short answer. But check with your planning lawyer before you make a stipulation based on the back of that. We need to start pulling things together, and I'm conscious that a couple of will need to leave. Can you just go to the very last slide, please, Tom? And so thank you to David, Duncan, Ed, and Tom. So just a couple of quick thoughts. So I mentioned this fleetingly earlier. The use of these mechanisms to de-risk doesn't require statutory change. It's there now. There's a range of mechanisms, some not much tried, some beginning to be tried more and more. So we would encourage you, those who work for local councils, to investigate those. Clearly, the London Plan has taken a step in that direction, as has the New Towns Task Force. We will be publishing soon, don't ask me the precise date, our analysis of the opportunity, which is definitely, without stretch numbers, into the millions. We'll also be doing detailed case studies. So those of you up and down the country, referencing work done in Chatham, or happening, I should say, in Chatham, because it's not complete yet, and also happened and happening elsewhere. If you'd like a case study in your area, or whether this approach is relevant to you, or whether you're being pushed in this direction by the London Plan or by other regional documents, please do say. We'll be definitely doing we're going to be doing some analysis of specific places where essentially we map viability. So if you imagine, if we put in place an LDO, hypothetically, we're going to map a before and after. So if you've got one of those towns where essentially all the streets in brownfield sites or within the town are essentially non-viable, nearly all of them, we're then going to map which of them become viable, I go green, and which perhaps move into an area in the middle where they're perhaps closer to viability, or it's hard to be absolutely certain. So if that is of interest, please do get in touch. We will be sharing these slides with those who've come to the call. I said I would get you out at or just before 1:30. It is now 1:27. So thank you all for coming. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Duncan. Thank you, David. Thank you, Lauren, for making it happen. I give you back your afternoon. Thank you, everyone. That's it. We're done.
Thank you, everyone.
Nice to talk to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Good to see you.